go.
Dawn will be late.
Yes. Talk to everybody. Good evening, residents of Everett, Washington. I would like to call to order the Everett City Council meeting of May 24th, 2023. The City Council meets all requirements of the State of Washington Open Public Meetings Act. Community members are welcome to join either in person, remote, via Zoom, or by calling in. For those who wish to participate in the future via Zoom, you'll find the instructions to register for public comment on the City of Everett website under the City Council Department. Please note, we do not allow comments on any kind of campaigning, whether for or against ballot measures or candidates running for office. We also do not accept comments focused on personal matters that are unrelated to city business. Clerk, will you please take the roll this evening?
Mayor Franklin,
Excused?
Councilmember Ryan,
Here.
Councilmember Schwab,
Excused.
Councilmember Fosse,
Here.
Councilmember Zerlingo,
Here.
Councilmember Vogely,
Here.
Vice President Tui,
Here.
President Stonecipher.
Here. I'd like to ask Councilmember Zarlingo, would you please lead us in the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Councilmember Vogely, would you please read the land acknowledgement this evening?
Yes, I shall. Thank you. The City Council wishes to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Shahoksh people, and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the May 17th meeting?
Councilmember Ryan moves approval of the minutes of the May 17th meeting.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Fosse,
Yes.
Councilmember Zerlingo,
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely,
Yes.
Vice President Tui,
Yes.
President Stonecipher.
Yes. And Mayor Franklin is not joining us tonight as she has a speaking engagement. We'll go on to, we've got public comment. Angie, do we have anyone signed up to speak under public comment this evening?
Good evening, Council President Stonecipher. We have two people here in chambers to speak, so we will start with William. If you could come to the podium.
Your microphone's not on. And William, we're going to use our technology tonight, so when you have 30 seconds left, the yellow light is going to come on over there and up here.
I think I can get it in there.
Okay, you've got 3 minutes, but once 30 seconds is left, you'll get a little notice.
All right.
And we just need you to state your full name and city of residence for the record.
All right. This button, right?
You're good. It's on.
This is where my 3 minutes start, right?
Yep.
Oh, it's on?
Yeah.
With the red light on?
Yep.
William Parents, 3711 Smith Avenue. And I have a suggestion for a city proposal for the homeless or people in recovery. Just wanted to start with a quote I found in town. It was, I came away from a very first-class thinking and made the right choice, and I like the idea of being part of something bigger than myself that is taking humanity forward and taking the data and using it positively. That was from Brian Start from Washington Data Bootcamp grad. And this proposal or suggestion might change the behavior of homeless people. Here, let me get it. Ooh. It was the homelessness is a significant problem in many countries, and individuals with criminal records are disproportionately represented among the homeless population, and a criminal record can be a significant barrier to find employment, housing, and other services, making it difficult for homeless individuals to rebuild their lives. I propose the city I propose that the city create a program that expunges criminal records for the homeless individuals or people in recovery who meet certain eligibility requirements. Eligibility requirements would be based on factors such as the length of the time since the offense and the individual's progress in rehabilitation. The program would be a positive impact on the community in a number of ways. It would help to improve the lives of people experiencing homelessness. Expungements of criminal records can help to remove the barrier and provide homeless individuals with a fresh start. Expungements is the process of sealing or destroying criminal records, which means that they will no longer be visible to the public, and this can be homeless individuals to overcome the stigma associated with having a criminal record and enable them to access jobs, housing, and opportunities that were previously unavailable to them. I believe that a proposal would be viable addition to the city's efforts to address homelessness, and I urge the city council to approve a proposal and help to make a difference in the lives of people experiencing homelessness. Overall, expungements of criminal records of individuals can be a win-win situation for businesses and society together. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brenda, if she could please come to the podium, and you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Do I push something here? The far right button on the mic. Yeah. Got it. Hello, council members. I'm Brenda Bolanos Ivory from Everett in Lowell. There was a news article published in My Everett News on Monday that I hope you all read. I created the county's pilot motel program with a hardworking team in 2020. A peer grassroots approach works best. We sent 26% of clients to treatment and housing fast. It's best practices in the state of Washington. Former staff wouldn't talk unless we're committed to people who would benefit from this program. We're not trying to make it fail. We're trying to make it succeed. I get it if you were tricked. I believed Robert Smiley for 5 years. I saw him help people and clean camps. I was shocked when he told me, "Don't help the clients. County is happy the motel is full." Robert also asked me to lie about data. I refused, and he replaced me with Sonny and Esther. A county representative admits in that article that their data is faulty. The Days Inn owner told county the program was unsafe and didn't pay him $65,000. Sonny emailed the owner to only talk with Sonny and Esther about the delinquent funds, not Robert. Sonny offered the motel owner $4,000, trying to keep $61,000. County received these emails, yet Sonny and Esther continue to run the motel program that the city of Everett also pays for. Pebbles died. She just got housing after a decade on the streets and was allegedly going to report transgender abuse. She died and wasn't found for 1 to 3 days. Where were the security checks they're doing twice a day? Forrest died a week later. His son's first act as an adult was to bury his father. I hope his second act is to get justice for his death. County officials claim oversight was done. The reports say that they only talked with Esther about the program. She's allegedly involved. Of course she said it was great. They didn't ask the motel owner if he was experiencing fraud. Sheriff Deputy Joyce is investigating fraud, but not the program. County Human Services are doing oversight again. A grassroots rumor says that county sent a checklist to Sonny for him to self-evaluate. Sonny is allegedly involved. What do you think he'll say? Adults on our streets can get treatment or sober housing within 2 weeks and 160 days. Most men work hard, committing daily survival crimes. What would it be like if they worked hard at a job? This isn't just possible. It's been done here in Snohomish County. Success is not services and shelter allowing drug use. People want fast treatment, fast supportive housing, and provide the services on the way. There were 42 empty men's sober beds last night. Residents and businesses are suffering while county is not using these resources. I'm here because I feel an obligation. I'm currently a member of Executive Summer's Heart Task Force. I'm an advocate. Acts of service is my love language. I think it's yours too. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. And that concludes our public comments for this evening.
Thank you, Angie. We will now move on to council comments and liaison reports. Councilmember Ryan.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Let's see, thank you for our commenters tonight. I appreciate you coming forward and sharing what's on your heart and your mind. It's definitely important that we keep focused on ways that we can best help people in our community. So I'm hearing from both commenters tonight, great ways that we can help people remove barriers towards pathways towards success. So I'm grateful for that. Let's see, for my report tonight, last night I attended the Beverly Park Pinehurst neighborhood meeting, and thank you to Bob Leonard for joining and to speak to some troubles that have been happening recently at Lions Park. So the neighborhood's very excited and energized for ways that the city can help improve conditions at the park. So thanks, Bob, for your attention to that. Next month, their meeting will be at the Boys and Girls Club at Lions Park, and their July meeting will be in the park itself. So I hope folks are able to join for those too as well. And they have a really amazing neighborhood night out, so definitely hit that up if you're in the area. Other than that, I think that's all I have for this evening. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councilmember Schwab is at Snohomish County tomorrow's meeting. This evening, he may join us later, but we will move on to Councilmember Fossey.
I wanted to also thank the speakers tonight, and I'm guessing that being in person, we don't have the contact information for the gentleman who was speaking about. We do? Okay. Would you make sure to get that to me? I wanted to follow up on that. And I was able to attend last night. The Everett Housing Authority had their Park District presentation that will be coming to council soon. It was nice to see a lot of community presence there, and asking lots of questions. So that'll be a pretty thrilling presentation, I'm sure, that we'll get. And I was able to go to the Northwest neighborhood meeting, and gosh, I love my neighborhood meetings. It was a really, really amazing presentation from the Downtown Everett Association. And as we know, they do a lot for this community, and just watching them go through the list of thing after thing after thing, from the flower program to the lights that were hanging up, on the streets during the holidays. It was just, I don't know. It was a really nice presentation, and just seeing the community there. Their enthusiasm for wanting to make a difference in our community, it just warms my heart every time. So this weekend, though, I hope everyone is feeling encouraged to attend the Marshallese Constitution Day celebration. It'll be at Jackson Park all weekend, and it is fun, and it is a beautiful experience. So if you have the time to just pop by and say hello and walk around, I encourage you to do so. Bring the family.
Thank you. Councilmember Zarlingo.
Well, I also would like to thank our commenters tonight. I think it's encouraging that with all the developments we've had recently and the difficulties of the problems with homelessness and drug and mental issues, that people are still, though they may disagree on the specifics, they're still interested in taking action. And with things like the Downtown Everett Association interested in taxing themselves to improve things. So I think that's one of the greatest things about Everett. We push forward. We seek to make things better, even if we don't agree on the details. So thank you all, and specifically thank you for coming to comment tonight. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Vogely.
Good evening. I know they're not here now, but William, parent, nice job this time with your comments. If you hear this from somewhere else, yeah, good job. I know that it's been tricky before, and you did very well tonight. And I also appreciate what you brought forward. And Brenda, Bolanos Ivory, thank you for that information. I know something about it, so I'm hoping that more will come from that discussion. I went to the Everett Housing Authority board meeting, and among other things, they shared the satisfaction and engagement survey and results for the people that work for EHA and their supervisors, and they were really good. For instance, percentages of employees endorsing the engagement statements, blah, 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 highly motivated to contribute to organization success, 92%. I'm not going to read them all, but they were all pretty high numbers, and like all above 80 and mostly in the 90s of percentage of good things. And just lost that other part of what I was going to say. So good job on them. And then also tonight was the Alliance for Housing Affordability meeting, and there's some pretty significant and awesome data that the city can use. Jennifer Gregerson was there as well, at least listening. I didn't see your face, but I saw your name. And I just wanted to share that Chris Collier has an immense amount of data from it's census data, but there's this other survey. Long story short, it's comprehensive, and it will go very well for the comprehensive plan update that is gaining traction. I think that is all. Rest in peace to Tina Turner. Absolutely. So, thank you.
Vice President Tui.
Yeah, I also want to comment on our commenters tonight. I appreciate them coming tonight, and some really thoughtful things for us to think about and ways that we can help the homeless. So thank you for that. I did attend the Council of Neighborhoods this week, and they had a great presentation from the CHIP program, which is always fun to watch and see the transformations that they do. So that was great, and that's all I have tonight.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank William, I know he's not here, for coming forward with this. And I would like to ask administration to help bring back some kind of briefing about record expungement at the city level. I know there's some state programs that do that, but I can't recall if we have any at the city level, or if we're able to do that. There may be some legal ramifications to that, but I would like to have the council hear a little bit more about that. That would be helpful. And that's all for me. Do we have an administrative update this evening?
No update.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Hall, City Attorney's Office, have anything for us this evening?
No report, but we are requesting a 5-minute executive session to discuss a legal matter pursuant to RCW 423110 1I,
Thank you.
with potential action to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Do I hear a motion for the 5 consent items?
Councilor Ryan moves approval of the 5 consent agenda items.
Tui seconds the motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Councilmember Fosse?
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes?
Vice President Tui?
Yes.
President Stone Cipher?
Yes, and next on our proposed action agenda, we have one proposed action item. It's a first reading, so I'll read it into the record. Item 6 is Council Bill 2305-31, first reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special construction project entitled Main Library Building Envelope Improvement Project, Fund 342, Program 040, to accumulate design cost for the project. Does anyone have questions on this proposed action item? Okay, moving on to our action agenda. It's a third and final reading. Council Bill 2303-18, third and final reading. Adopt an ordinance criminalizing the intentional obstruction of a city public works worker engaging in the employee's official duties, amending chapter.
Excuse me, President
Sorry.
Stone Cipher. Yep, it's
That's
the
right.
other two, yeah. that I circled on the agenda, ends in 3-2 and 3-1.
This paper, sorry. My apologies. Council Bill 2305-31, third reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special construction project entitled Main Library Building Envelope Improvement Project. Okay, I got to start over. I have the totally wrong thing here. Okay, we are going back to proposed action. Item 6 is Council Bill 2305-32, first reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special improvement project entitled Water Quality Retrofit Improvements Fund 336, Program 036. Third and final reading will be on June 7th. Any questions on this item before we move on? Thank you. And our action item, item 7, is Council Bill 2305-31, third reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special construction project entitled Main Library Building Envelope Improvement Project, Fund 342, Program 040, to accumulate design costs for the project. I hear a motion.
Councilmember Ryan moves approval of Council Bill 2305-31.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Ryan.
Yeah, just to mention that it says that the anticipated that this is for the design portion, and anticipated construction will start in 2024, but if part of the improvements include fixing a leaky roof, I would support expediting construction so that we can potentially start that sooner than after our next rainy season. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Councilmember Fosse?
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes.
Vice President Tui?
Yes.
President Stonecipher?
Yes, and now we will have our council briefing agenda. These items come before the city council serving as a council committee of the whole and are likely to be scheduled at a future meeting. I think up first, we have Nicole Weber, our community relations, our director of engagement, I'm sorry. You're here to introduce our lobbyist.
Hello, I'm Nicole Weber, Director of Engagement for the City of Everett, and I'm here to introduce Trevor Justin, who served as our lobbyist during the 2023 session. Unfortunately, Mayor Franklin is serving on a panel this evening and was unable to be here in person, but I address the process of creating the legislative agenda and some of your comments around that on her behalf. In years past, we have created collaborative priorities through a longer planning process and plan to move back to that model for the 2024 session. 2023 was an exception because we had a change in our lobbyists just before session and had to hit the ground running with a shorter list of priorities. As a team, we're committed to a more robust process and agenda for next year. Mayor Franklin will work with council leadership on developing that process, and we'll have more to share on that later this year. Trevor has done a great job serving our city this session and has been working in Olympia as a lobbyist for almost 10 years. He has worked on a wide range set of policy issues and has represented numerous municipalities, local governments, transit agencies, education and human service clients, as well as technology and housing providers. He has a strong record of success securing money in the state operating, capital, and transportation budgets for his clients and is here today to provide us an update for his work for the city of Everett. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, Trevor.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Nicole, and thanks, council. It's nice to be in front of you. This is the first time I've been in front of full council, so nice to see you all. I think I've met about half of you, but good to be here. As Nicole mentioned, I kind of hit the ground running and started in December right before session, and it really hit the ground running. I'll give kind of a high-level session overview, and then I'll talk about our legislative priorities and then some of our wins for the session. Of course, happy to answer any questions you may have as well. So this year was a long 105-day legislative session. Next year will be a short session, 60 days. This was the big 105-day session. There was actually a little bit of bonus time, too. I'll get to that in a second. But the long 105-day session focused on the big operating, transportation, and capital budgets. These are biennial budgets, so it'll run from July 1 of 2023 this year until June 30 of 2025. Next year, they'll do a supplemental budget to kind of tweak those, but this year was kind of the big 2-year budget. So 105 days, a lot of work, a lot of big priorities. And there was actually a special session that the governor called, which has led to a 106-day session. Just a one-day special session on May 16th. Legislature came in for about 5.5 hours to polish off one issue that they didn't get to it in the regular session, and I'll get to that in a second as well. Just want to highlight the city's legislative priorities. We kind of had 4 big buckets of issues that we wanted to focus on. That was healthy and thriving communities, kind of talked about outdoor activities, quality education, mentorship, some early learning activities and policies. Public safety, that was a big priority for the city this year. Voluntary treatment options for individuals who needed those, support services for other individuals, little improvement around officers, work closely with Chief Templeman on some of those issues, and better connecting people to crisis services that they needed. In the quality of life and economic development bucket, kind of focused on quality housing, a lot of housing. That was a big policy issue area for the legislature this year, weighed in on some of those proposals. Support responsive revenue options, that was on the table as well. Capital funding for a multi-purpose outdoor sports facility, that was one of our big successes this year, which I'll get to in a second. An expansion of green infrastructure. And our last big bucket was workforce development, which was kind of the behavioral health and general healthcare issues, workforce, childcare and access, STEM education, some of those other items. So that was our kind of big, broad-based legislative agenda, which is why you'll see in the final legislative report, it was tracking about 200 pieces of legislation for you all this year. A lot of impacts on city business, as you all are aware. Just want to highlight some of our wins this legislative session. As I had mentioned, was in on a coalition ask from the minor league baseball teams this year. There was a $24 million capital budget ask from the minor leagues across the state. I think there was about 9 different stadiums. The Everett Aqua Sox, obviously here in Everett, was the biggest funder of that $24 million coalition ask, where we secured $7.4 million to renovate the current Aqua Sox stadium, which is Everett Memorial Stadium. Pleased to report the funding of $7.4 million was secured. The language in the capital budget was a little bit off. They actually funded it to the school district and to Everett Memorial Stadium. In communication with the city's legal department, Tim Benedict, we wanted to have that money allocated to the city and the Funko Field, so a little bit of work to be done in the next legislative session, but work closely with legislators on that funding item. And legislators actually wrote a 4 corners letter to the Office of Financial Management, which kind of went on the record saying that the money was intended to go to the city, even though the budget actually says it went to the school district. So that's not a legally binding letter, but it's kind of going on the record saying that they intend to come back next year and fix some of that language. The important thing is the funding was secured in the budget, so that's good to see. Obviously the public safety bucket was a big issue area for us this year. There was a police pursuits legislation that was passed that Chief Templeman supported, kind of changed reasonable suspicion, probable cause to reasonable suspicion on individuals that caused harm against other persons. So that was an improvement. I think city supported that piece of legislation. And then the Blake bill, which I'm sure you all are well aware, this is the issue that caused this special session. The governor called the special session May 16th. This was an issue that was brought to the House floor. I could go on and on about this issue. It took a lot of twists and turns throughout the legislative session. There was a version that passed the Senate. A version was tweaked in the House and passed the House, different versions. There was a final conference report that reached the House floor on the final day of the legislative session, actually failed on the House floor. It's very rare that happens. Usually a bill only reaches the House floor if it has the votes to pass. The speaker put the bill on the floor and it didn't have enough votes. It only had 43 votes, needed 50 to pass. So that was one unresolved issue that the legislature didn't resolve before the legislature adjourned on April 23rd, the 105th day. It led to the governor calling a special session. That happened on May 16th, and the legislature came in on May 16th, and the House took up the bill, the Senate took up the bill, this Blake bill, and then passed the final compromise that the governor signed. You all are probably aware of why it's called the Blake bill, but it was a decision by the state Supreme Court in 2021 which struck down the state's criminal statute prohibiting possession of controlled substances, kind of dealt with that knowingly or not knowingly possession of controlled substances. So again, a contentious issue that the legislature went into overtime for. I think most would agree that the final policy, which passed with broad bipartisan support, was about 43 of the 50 voted for it in the Senate and about 83 votes for it in the House. was a good compromise policy at the end of the day. Kind of dealt with that substance use and abuse, open public use, but also how do we get these individuals into treatment that need the treatment? And that was really the goal. The city's position was to how do we help individuals who are ill get into treatment, and that was the kind of the biggest goal of this bill. I think this will be an issue that will continue to be discussed in years going forward. It's a big policy. I think folks agree that it was a well-negotiated compromise. Senator Robinson sponsored that bill. But again, we'll kind of see how the current policy, it goes into effect July 1, and then I think that it will likely be revisited, maybe not next session, but in future sessions for sure. So those were some of the big successes for the city. There's also a lot of housing bills. Housing was another big policy this legislative session. A big win, the middle housing bill, that was House Bill 1110, sponsored by Representative Bateman, kind of increases density on a lot of different lots. Allows for two units per lot, depending on the population size of the city, 25,000 to 75,000. Also, if you're a larger city, closer to that 75,000 population, have up to 4 lots within a quarter mile of transit. So a nice piece of housing policy there. And again, the goal is to address the housing affordability, right? There's a lot of housing's expensive for a lot of folks, and the legislature had a goal to try and increase housing options and other options for individuals to get into housing. That was great. Another piece of policy that did not pass but the city supported was House Bill 1628. This is the real estate excise tax bill that would have gone into more housing construction. That bill did not pass this session, but no doubt will be coming back in future sessions. There was also a housing benefit district bill that did not pass this session. There was a transit-oriented development bill that was sponsored by Senator Elias that did not pass this session. So there was a lot of housing policies that were introduced and will continue to be worked on. But that middle housing bill was kind of the biggest, most significant housing policy that passed this legislative session. So I will pause there and see if there's any questions, and happy to.
Councilmember Vogely.
Nice to finally meet you.
You as well.
I know that you already mentioned the 7.4 million for the stadium. The first word that caught me off guard was renovate, and so I hear you already that it says it's going to the school district. There needs to be some verbiage changed and this and that and the other thing. So is renovate another one of those words that needs to be changed in the budget? Because, well, the powers that be, I don't know if I'm one of them, doesn't want a renovation. They want a whole new stadium. So
Yeah, no, great question. That was, sorry I wasn't more clear about that. The goal that we had to get in the capital budget was to have the funding be flexible, so it could either renovate the current site or look at the potential new site. I know the city's going through a feasibility study to look at a potential new site. So we wanted to have that language flexible. Again, the language was, I think it was just kind of missed, right? Legislators are really busy, and the language that we wanted wasn't inserted into the capital budget, but I've already talked to both capital budget chairs about tweaking this language for next session, so it's kind of, we can either use it at the new site or the old site. And I talking to Tim Benedict, who is the deputy city attorney, he said that the funding probably wouldn't need to be used until after the supplemental year next year, so probably July 1 of 2024. So it sounds like we have time to get that language right, but yes, to your point, the goal is to have it for either the current site or the new site, and I think from what I've heard, I don't think the feasibility studies yet, but I know a lot of folks are interested in a new site for sure. So yeah, the goal is to have that funding flexible for both.
thank you. That's all right now.
Thank you.
Is there an opportunity to ask more questions later, or are you just
Oh, yeah.
pausing?
Yeah. Do you have more
Yeah.
presentation?
Oh, no, feel free to jump in.
Well, I have a few questions, so I didn't want to jump in if they're not exactly related to that.
No,
So,
go ahead.
Do you have more to present?
I just, unless you all wanted me to run through the bill list, it's in the report, you can read that, but happy to stand for any questions.
I will defer to Councilmember Ryan first, and I'll follow.
Great. Yeah, that was my question too. I wasn't sure if you had more to present on, and you're going to answer questions anyways. But yes, nice to meet you finally. You mentioned that you've met about half of us. In what capacity did you meet with other council members?
On Zoom meetings, I met with Councilmember Schwab, I think Councilmember Stonecipher, I think we had a couple legislative council meetings, I think in December and January, February. So met a couple of you there, but I know this is obviously my first time in front of full council, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was a Zoom one in one of the last of the intergovernmental subcommittee meetings. I think that's
Yep.
where I think we saw
Yep,
each other
and I
on
think
Zoom.
you were there
So
too,
I think
Councilmember.
that was where that came.
Okay, understood. Thanks, yeah, and I hear the comment from Nicole as well, and I had looked at previous legislative years, and in 2022, for the 2022 session, there was an update at the January 12th meeting. The 2021 session had a preview in December, and then a post session on May 21st. The 2020 session had a preview and a priority review on January 8th of 2020. We all know how 2020 went. The 2019 session had a session priorities preview on January 9th. The 2018 session had a preview and a agenda review on December 6th. And the 2017 session had a state priorities review on January 4th. So it sounds like you started in December, so there would have been, even though things are moving pretty quickly, there could have been time for.
Councilmember Ryan, I'm just gonna point out that whether Trevor comes here or not, it's not his choice. So I would rather that we not interrogate him about the process. We have other business to do with administration about the process. But if we want to ask questions of him about what happened in this session.
Sure.
Because I don't think he set the agenda for when he came to our council meetings.
Okay. So then, can you share a little bit more about, so I see on the list, I read the reports every week when they came through. Some say oppose, some say support, but I'm not clear on what your role is or was during session and how you actively participated in advocating for or against bills. So my question is, in what ways did you testify for bills, or which ones did you testify for? What was your role during session with the legislature?
Thank you, Councilmember. I was the boots on the ground, right, having a lot of those conversations and meeting with the delegation. Worked a lot with Senator Robinson, Representative Cortez, Representative Fossey. We met with the mayor when the mayor was in town. I think that was in February or so. But yeah, just the boots on the ground every day, signing in on pieces of legislation, having those hallway conversations, having those meetings with legislators, kind of communicating our positions. As you can see, there was a lot of pieces of bills that I was tracking for the city that would affect the city. Can't exactly prioritize all 200 of those pieces of legislation, right? So we had to stay pretty focused on the capital budget and some of the public safety things, and taking direction from the deputy mayor, the mayor, the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. So it was just the boots on the ground, kind of every day, day to day. Things move quickly and fast in session, as I'm sure you're aware. So yeah, I was just there every day to represent the city and try and advocate for you all as best as the city wanted.
Great. Were there certain bills that you testified on?
I don't believe Chief Templeman testified on a lot of the police reform bills. I think police pursuits, as well as the Blake legislation a couple times. I don't recall, I'd have to go back and double check if I ever testified on any of the pieces of legislation for you all. It's a lot more impactful when city officials kind of testify, because legislators know who I am. I'm down there every day, right? But it shows a little bit more of an impact when city shows up to testify. And this year, there's some of the nice things that was held over from COVID was the virtual testimony was still allowed. So yeah, I think the chief showed up in person a couple times, testified virtually once or twice. But I would have to go back and check if I specifically testified on any piece of legislation.
But you were able to sign in pro or against
Yeah,
a number
absolutely.
of bills? Great.
Yep.
And then for the list that we have here, how was that list created? Was that something that you pulled together based on the city's priorities, or was that more driven from administration?
It's more from administration, or I just started in December, so kind of hit the ground running and had a couple priorities, and we just kind of went to work on those. But I think to Nicole's comments previously, if I'm lucky enough to represent you all again next session, we'd be happy to have a more collaborative process earlier in, before session starts, probably in October, November, to kind of get priorities on a page and make sure that council and the mayor and everyone feels good about them, so.
Great. And I just had a couple of last questions about specific bills. I didn't see House Bill 1333 listed. It was the bill that would have established a committee to look into domestic terrorism incidences in the state of Washington. It was requested by the Attorney General's office. I was curious if that had been mentioned at any point, or if that was not something that was on our list. It's just something I followed really closely, so I wanted to see.
I hadn't heard about that piece of legislation from anyone at the city. You're right, it's not on the tracker, so didn't get any sort of direction on that piece of legislation.
And then the other one was 5236 for safe staffing levels. I see it listed and was curious how the city supported our nurses during the legislative session.
5236, you said?
Yeah, safe
Was
staff.
there not a position listed?
No.
I'm confident that I logged our position on pieces of legislation that we officially weighed in on. We might not, I don't believe we weighed in on that bill officially.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Fosse.
That one surprised me, given all the things going on at council with their nurses coming here and the issues that we've been having, and that there was our own senator working on a legislative fix that for some reason our city wasn't actively supporting it when we're having our own issues at Providence that are just continuing to encounter more and more problems. And now I worry about the future when it comes to what's going on with Compass Health and those beds. So I was really surprised of the kind of, I understand that there was some late hiring and or whatever had happened, but there's not a whole lot on here as far as support. And I don't believe that we've officially met. Have we met before?
We met when you were working with Representative Wicks, and we met when the mayor was in town. I think it was in February a couple times, so we've met a couple times.
I met with the mayor probably for about 7 minutes the whole session. So, and you weren't there. So I'm not sure, like, there was another mayor that was there, but that was the extent of that.
I recall the meeting. I was actually at that meeting, Representative, Councilmember. I was there as well, so.
Okay. And did you guys did you go down there often with the city on testifying on things, or was this more of like you were down there and then the mayor or the chief of police, whoever was coming down occasionally? I'm just really curious if there was like a focus on the Senate, because it just seemed like I didn't hear or see much from the city at all.
I was there every day, yeah. There was some virtual testimony and some in-person testimony.
Okay.
Some of those, kind of our priorities were kind of bigger bucket items, right? Like the capital budget ask and the Blake issue, which was weighed in by, AWC was kind of taking the lead from the city's perspective. But was there to support this AWC's position and the city as well. But yeah, no, I was there every day. Chief came down a few times, the mayor came down once or twice. So yeah, no, I was there every day, and the mayor was a handful of times as well. In my other hat, I do serve on the Community Safety, Justice, and Reentry Committee. And so dealing directly with those public safety policies and things that impact the police were specific policies that I had a hand in and worked on. So, Chief Templeman, I had some great conversations with him, but I was surprised that there wasn't outreach with regards to the flexible scheduling bill on our side of things. Lovick had put it through. It was 54-24. You guys had it on your list, but you didn't have support or opposed. And that was a bill that would have allowed for local jurisdictions to have flexible scheduling requirements, and it would allow for people who are maybe retired to be able to be part of the workforce and open that up for maybe a little bit more of a equitable representation for people who maybe couldn't do those regimented, like very, very strict scheduling, and it unfortunately died. So. Yeah, I don't see a position listed. I don't believe we officially weighed in on that piece of legislation.
Yeah, I'm going to
So,
given intercede for a second, just to say, I think, as I understand it, whether we weigh in on something is not Trevor's choice. So I think if we have concerns about whether we're weighing in on things, we need to take it up with administration.
Oh,
is
we had
my
lots of concerns
understanding.
throughout the time period of the session. I think we brought them up actually and said that the legislative report.
I
Now, this was
understand
saying that
but
this was
I
one of our
don't
buckets.
think
So I was,
trying to hold Mr.
it's not him.
Justin accountable. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Let's ask him questions. We have other business to deal with administration about the process, and I totally agree with
And
you.
I'm asking if that was one of the policies, given the buckets of public safety and the other ones, if that was one of the ones that was specifically related to public safety and workforce, which were two of our buckets, if that was one of the ones that had intentions to be weighed in, and maybe that was seen in the Senate. So I'm getting clarification on that.
I think we didn't weigh in, as I understand it, if there was no position stated. So I'm just saying, I don't think it's productive to hold Mr. Justin accountable for our concerns about whether things got weighed in on, because that was not his choice.
Yeah, this isn't about him. This is more about what the
Well,
city's
let's ask him
position
the
are.
questions we have of him, and then we can take up our other questions with administration.
I thought that's
Please.
what I was doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So with regards to the budget investments specifically, I know that the city had you push for the baseball. Other than that, with capital investments, were there other budget items that they had you advocating for, or that they were advocating for with capital? Was it strictly just the baseball?
Baseball stadiums, we didn't have any other specific capital asks.
Okay. And were there any other budget advocacies that were going out of the general budget, like, workforce, Medicaid reimbursement rates, anything else that they were trying to advocate for?
The stadium ask was the main capital budget ask. There was no operating or transportation ask specific.
Gotcha. Okay, is there things that was, that specifically that were missed in here that you anticipate the next session that you will be continuing to support or oppose? Like things that died that you're expecting to come forward next session?
As you know, all the bills will be reintroduced in the second biennium. But yeah, anything that we have a position on and anything we want to take a position on between now and before the session starts, obviously would advocate for the city and represent the administration and you all down in Olympia. So.
Okay. And am I allowed to ask a question of Nicole as she?
Sure.
Okay. Why did we have a change in what happened in December? Because were you previously with us or you were hired on in December?
I think it was December 1st is when I started. That was
Okay.
the first time I'd worked with the city.
What happened with our previous lobbyists?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can get it for you and come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that just seems like a awful timing to switch right before session starts.
I think everyone would agree with that statement, yes.
Okay. All right, so as far as I guess my only other concerns and issues are going to be of, having that be a little bit more involved. I understand that there was some difficulties there with the sudden changeover, but with the resources that you have available at your fingertips, it seems like we had a lot of missed opportunities with this legislative session of things that we could have advocated for. So, and I feel like some of these council members have a really good idea of some of those priorities that our community would have benefited from. And I think that was missed and ignored, but mostly just missed.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Trevor, thank you for coming and giving us your report. Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if there are specific bills that maybe don't have all the details, I've got notes about the ones that were mentioned, but if there's anything else you didn't get to that you want me to follow up on, I'll be happy to do that to see if it was ever on the radar or not. And then the pre-session update and kind of that process, I've noted that. And if you have other ideas of ways to handle that successfully, we would love to hear those too, and hit the ground really running, not kind of scrambling for 2024. So.
yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask, I would like to ask administration to bring back to the council a proposed calendar for the legislative session for next year, how we will be engaged, when we will be weighing in on priorities. And as the time goes through the session, I'd like to see a calendar for in session. And I'm sure, Trevor, you have some good ideas. You work with other cities, I'm sure, counties, and maybe you have a good idea for how that has worked well in other cities. I know what we've done in the past. I'm happy to help weigh in on that. But If we could get a schedule together so that we all kind of understand what's going to happen, that would be helpful for us. And I'm hoping that we would have that before the end of the summer, have that calendar in place, and so we know when we need to make time on our council agendas for this work, because it is important, and I think I'd rather have it come to the city council as committee of the whole, because everyone has an opinion about how we should be doing things. So that would be great if you guys can work on that and bring that back to us.
I believe first day of the 2024 session is January 8th, so we definitely want to meet with the delegation and others, in November, October, ideally, to get everything teed up to go, so.
Right, yeah, and we would definitely want to, and that's, yeah, and even before then, when are we going to start talking about some of our priorities and making sure that that weighs into our work down there and the things that you're doing for us. So we appreciate your efforts very much, and thank you, Nicole, for being here to help get us through this process. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to represent Olympia this year.
Thank you, Trevor. We will move to item 9 now. We have our planning director, Yorick Stevens-Wajda, here to brief us on the 2044 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update. Good evening, Yorick.
Good evening, Council
and
President.
Becky is here too. Hi, Becky.
Yes. Good evening, Council. Yorick Stevens-Wajda, Planning Director, and we have Becky Abelman-McCrary, Long Range Planning Manager. I'm going to give you a briefing. It's been quite a while since we've been before the full council for a briefing on the comprehensive plan. Some of this may be a refresher. We've done briefings to committees, public meetings that some of you are at, and also previous meetings, so forgive us if some of this is a repeat or a refresher, but I think it's important foundation. Go to the next slide. So we're going to cover some background, statutory requirements from the state for the comprehensive plan update, the housing and employment targets that really set the benchmark that we must plan to as part of this update process. And then Becky will talk a little bit about the update process, and the growth alternatives is the step that we're at right now before we head into the environmental review process. And then just a bit on the specific amendment request process application window that we're in right now. And that should be an evening along with your questions and discussion. So the requirements, the basic requirements for this periodic update, it's done every 10 years per state law. The main purpose is to advance the planning horizon. Right now we're at 2035 for our existing comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2015. We're advancing that planning period to 2024 to 2044. They're 20-year planning periods. These periodic updates are an opportunity or a requirement for cities to catch up to state laws regarding growth management and planning that have been adopted in the preceding 8 to 10 years since the last periodic update. Probably the most important of those is House Bill 1220 from 2 years ago, which changed the housing planning requirements. Trevor mentioned the House Bill 1110, and there's a couple other planning-related bills that we presented to the Built Environment Committee a couple weeks ago. Those are too new for this periodic update cycle, but we are going to fold in the major thrusts of them. The required deadline for incorporating those is generally 6 months after the periodic update, although with a requirement that you only update your plan once per year, you could consider them essentially part of this update as well. This planning framework starts at the state level and includes a regional component. We have Vision 2050 and the multi-county planning policies and the regional growth strategies that establish a generalized regional framework for planning. And then Snohomish County tomorrow adopts countywide planning policies that also coordinate and direct the planning of the cities within the county. Councilmember Schwab is at a meeting of the Snohomish County Tomorrow Steering Committee this evening, which includes adoption of housing targets, which I'll get into in a moment, that will work their way into those countywide planning policies. The planning process must be done, and we would do it anyways, with robust public participation and engagement. And we'll talk about what we're doing in that regard, and environmental review under the State Environmental Policy Act via an environmental impact statement. So I'll touch on housing targets first. We are a city right now of about 115,000 people in about 50,000 housing units. the buildable lands report, which was done a couple of years ago and is a very specific way of measuring the buildable capacity in housing and employment within the cities of the county, shows capacity for about another 21,000 homes in the city. And with the growth targets that are in the final stages of adoption at the countywide level, we need to create capacity for 17,000 additional homes above that 21,000 capacity that we have with existing zoning. This planning cycle that we're in, the House Bill 1220 added some new definition to the state requirement to plan adequately for all economic segments of the population in terms of housing. That's reflected in the colored bars, both present and future, which show housing affordability distribution that we have now and that we need to plan for. The next slide will zoom in on those. On the left, you have the distribution of affordability segments that we have now. Median household, or area median income is $113,000, and that's the 100% level right here, between gold and peach color. The bar on the right is what we're responsible for planning to accommodate, and the middle bar is the delta, the difference between those two. This is subject to the action that may have already occurred tonight, may not occur tonight, may change, but this was the recommendation that came out of the Planning Advisory Committee, the staff group that supports the steering committee. And it seeks to move the county into a better distribution of housing affordability segments throughout the county. What that means is that with these targets, you would see more of a balance between more expensive housing and lower cost housing in all of the different jurisdictions. What that means for Everett, we have a fairly healthy supply of affordable housing. We're a little bit light on the blue column there, or the blue row. And so our targets call for a lot of the growth to be in that higher cost, higher affordability. Other jurisdictions that are overrepresented with expensive housing now will have a different looking bar. And these are generalized, so obviously you can't predict exactly what the market is going to provide. The lowest segments on there, the very bottom row is shelter beds, and then the other gray is permanent supportive housing, and then the 0 to 30% of area median income are the types of housing typically not provided by the market, or said another way, almost impossible to provide by the market. Yes, Councilmember Vogely.
There are 2 lines as one?
There are a couple lines that are 0. So we would not need to provide any additional 30 to 50% area median income besides what we have now. It's a quirk of the math that got us there.
I guess that's just like, how do I read that print?
Oh, sure. Well, those are 0. So if you can't read it, then the answer is 0. So 0 to 30 is 5,900 units of 0 to 30 non-permanent supportive housing, and then 0 for 30 to 50%, and 0 roughly for 50 to 80% median income.
I'm going to have to watch that back because you just said that way too fast, and that's okay. I will watch it back.
We'll send you a table with the numbers.
Thank you.
There is some quirky math in there, but what that means is that the focus on the new supply is going to be a little bit at the lowest end and quite a bit at the higher end. Mm-hmm. It is important to note that there is no net loss in this chart of anything below median income. These aren't the same housing units that will stay in this band over time. Housing units age, new ones are created. The housing unit that rents for a level that's affordable to 60% area median income now will be different in the future. But overall, the distribution of the housing affordability levels, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm seeing the for 2044 target, the blue section for folks that make over 120% AMI is the largest section. But when I think about the types of housing those folks can purchase, it's the larger house on a larger lot. So how are we balancing, where do we find all these lots to build mansions on for the greatest percentage of people needing housing that also is the greatest percentage of land that's taken up for that type of housing?
Yeah, I think there are expensive houses, options on small lots. I was looking at, for kind of a different subject, accessory dwelling units. There was one lot in Seattle that it was a house and they built an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, and the accessory, sorry to say, sold last year for $795,000, and it was a 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit, and then the main unit sold for $980,000 or something like that. So we can get really expensive with nice materials on a small lot size, and then of course condominiums and you know, apartments that are built with
High-end, yeah.
granite countertops
On
and
the
things like that.
waterfront, maybe.
Yes.
Just conversation. We could get really tall high rises that nobody wants, I understand that. And be like New York or something where people really want the apartments at the top of the building, right? And then we've got all the other ones. So let's just put that out there, people. We can build high and have really great music festivals and this and that, and people want to be here. Okay, moving on.
A question about that, I guess in terms of the appetite, the people who can afford the higher end housing like that, some of those people will be retirees, people downsizing into a fancier but smaller place, maybe without stairs, with elevators. You're talking about in a high rise. I guess there's nothing that says that necessarily those people have to be making that income. The standard is that they have to be able to afford things that somebody that at 120% of AMI or so or above. Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's just a kind of an implication in there that I was struggling with, but I see it clearly now.
And this is a new direction in terms of the specific numeric targets by income category, and the Department of Commerce has guidance for it, and they will be reviewing the comprehensive plans. And I think it's going to, like I said, it's general. We don't dictate the market. We create the conditions by which the market and the public sector for that lower end can create it. But I think most of the focus is going to be ensuring that that there are no significant barriers created by the comprehensive plan and the zoning code to the achievement of this, and then the general supply.
One other question about barriers, because it does seem like a condominium arrangement will enable a number of these things that we've been light on for some years, partly because of legislation on that. And as I understand it, there was a change to a definition. I think it had to do with 12 units or less and 2 stories or less that would be an exception from the condominium rules, the liability rules. Can you give me just a general overview? Are we headed towards something that, I mean, I'll do some independent research as well with the people who are doing the building, but are we headed toward a reduction of those barriers that will give us some options for condominiums that really would be taken advantage of?
That is something that staff is really interested in. We heard it from the council at a recent meeting. I believe Councilmember Schwab mentioned a program around facilitating condo development and purchasing and everything. So I think it's something that, yes, we've heard loud and clear from all of you, the goal for home ownership opportunities, and a lot of structured buildings right now, larger structures are rentals, and so that's something that we heard loud and clear.
Yeah, because it seems like there are two great opportunities there. Some of it is people who are probably older but have money and are downsizing. The other part about that is people who want to enter into our community as owners. Not everybody should or wants to, but for those who do, condos have historically been an opportunity that way, and we are so light on them. All right, great. Thank you. That helps me aim some of my own
Searching
research.
on a property website just for this presentation, I think I only found like 4 or 5 condos available in Everett, many more in some other cities, but even there, it's a pretty small part. This would be a good time to go through the next 4 slides are some examples of Everett housing that's available right now. So at the 95% AMI, just so you know what we're talking about, level, that's apartment 713 in the Nimbus apartments. So that's an example of I think that one rents for $27.70 a month, and the affordability level would be about $100,000 household income for a household of 3 in a 2-bedroom. Here is the comfortable living at the Dorn Apartments, 1825. That's at the 65% level. And then next, here's half of a duplex that is adjacent to the Baker Heights Park District area, 1695, 60% AMI. Need a $70,000 a year household income for that one. And then here is a house, if I did the math right, it's right around the median income that it would take if you had $50,000 to put down on it. Then your monthly payment would be $3,600 a month, and household income of $145,000 is what it would take for that. So those are a little bit of what those numbers are, but again, these things will, every one of those I assume would get less expensive as age takes its toll on the housing stock, and new things would rise up to replace. Anything else on the housing targets? Okay. Employment targets, so similar to the housing one, we have currently about 100,000 jobs in the city. Under the employment targets, we need to plan for an additional 65,000 jobs or so. Click button. So we'll get into the 3 alternatives that we're designing or we're developing for our environmental impact statement. But existing plans has a capacity of 140,000 jobs. So we have room for 40,000 more jobs. We need room for 67,000 more jobs. One more click is what our 2 growth alternatives are planning for. The colored bars on this one, and I'm sorry for the text being so microscopic on what those map to, but these are economic sectors. Services is the brown one, and I believe industrial manufacturing is the purple one, and then others in between. Go to the next slide. The numbers on the top left there, just to illustrate how we will work with these numbers, if you took the 77,000 jobs that we need to plan for and take a proportion of the region's sectors that the regional economic forecast suggests are coming to the region over the next 30 years, it would have that breakdown. 55,000 out of the 77,000 would be in services. Not much in manufacturing. This is the regional average. We're a manufacturing center, so I would imagine that we would capture a substantial portion of the regional manufacturing job growth that we're expecting. This forecast with these distributions was done in 2018. There have definitely been some shifts in the economy since 2018, I think to the benefit of manufacturing, a little bit less so on the retail side. And of course, warehousing and trade and utilities are all doing pretty robust. Either way, I think a big message is that a lot of the job growth is expected to be in services.
Quick question before we
Yes.
go on, just because we're talking about job and housing growth, and the report that was what the folks at Snohomish County Tomorrow are chewing on right now talked about Snohomish County, if I remember the number right, it was in the past 10 years, a growth of about 16%, so this was county. But that equates to, if I do my math right, about 1.5% a year. And it looks like the slope of the earlier lines we were seeing, and some of these numbers are significantly above that. And I remember seeing this some years ago with respect to the school district, some of what they were planning on, but the actual growth often ended up behind that. Do you have a generalized perspective over what we were thinking about 5 or 10 years ago versus what actually happened, and how that might inform what we're doing here?
Mm-hmm. A lot of the reason for that is the regional growth strategy. It started in 2008 with Vision 2040, which established Everett as a metropolitan center in the 5 geography framework for the region. We're the county seat, we're the economic and cultural and government hub for the county, and so we get most of the growth. That was, I think, different from post-2008 to pre-2008, and that's responsible for us expected to accommodate 20% of Snohomish County's population and employment growth, roughly. And I think we currently have less than that, 15% maybe of the population. So yes, we would be growing faster than the county as a whole. Going forward under this plan, that has not been the case in recent years, or even probably since the 90s or so, I think, we've trailed the rest of the county in growth. The plan is a direction, and it's changing the direction of a large cargo ship, and it's going to take some time. There are plenty of things working in our favor. All the hard work that the city government and you all are doing to make this an attractive and livable place. There's less developable land and excess developable land outside of the city. A lot of that was gobbled up first, and there's not much left of that. And then things like light rail is expected to bring a lot.
Okay, so if I get this correctly, then we are obligated to make plans that are consistent with this. That doesn't mean it will happen. It doesn't mean we're obligated to make it happen, but, okay,
That's right.
got it.
Although the cities and the county and the transit agencies and the school districts and WashDOT, all are supposed to be rowing in the same direction. So we should have help in that regard.
Councilmember Vogely.
I don't have the numbers with me. I know I've brought them up before, but maybe you and Chris Collier from AHA could get together and just, or not, he could just come over. But like social workers and nurses and teachers and all of the people that we need to live here can't afford to live here, like now or in the future. And I mean, almost like we need a barter town, and who's going to run it? But
yeah, there are some paradoxes with affordability. We heard from our consultants with the housing development incentives that we need the rents to be higher to attract more development, the development that we need to create the housing to mitigate the housing affordability problems. But the rent is too high. So I think there are a lot of, the legislature put a lot of work into this. We're putting a lot of work into this. I think supply is a big part of that answer. I think there are some factors outside of our control, labor costs, material costs, and all of that. Definitely some paradoxes, and Chris is probably better at articulating them than I am. A couple more pieces on this slide. So the way we turn jobs into zoning and comprehensive plan maps is you look at the standard space usage per employee. So for services, the assumption in the buildable lands report was 400 square feet per employee. If you take that times 55,000 jobs, you need to create or accommodate 9 to 21 million square feet. 9 to 21 million. The 9 was if you take Everett's current proportion of its jobs in the services category. There was a version of this slide that had both options, but that was too complicated. So 21 million square feet, and one more click. That is 210 Everett municipal buildings, or 125 of the new Kaiser buildings. They're 100,000 and 165,000 square feet respectively. We do have a big city, and we do have a lot of land to accommodate that, although as you saw with the target exceeding our capacity, not quite enough by the buildable lands number. That is the highest. It gets better from there for a couple of reasons. One, a job is not a full-time equivalent, so it is counted in this system. So if you have 2 jobs, that's 2 jobs. These were done before gig work got big. These were done before remote work started to be more of a thing. There's going to be a substantial number of jobs that don't consume space at all. If you drive for a transportation network company, you don't have an office, you don't consume space, you are a job. So I think the numbers will go down from there, and we haven't fully sorted out the impact of all those things. Remote work and other such things might decrease the amount of space per employee. And then also we expect that we would actually have less services and more manufacturing here.
And getting through the, sorry, Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. So you've got kind of old information. Is this all going to get updated through the process that we're going through? Is that, I mean, you're saying that you're
We're-
using information from 2008?
2018.
I'm sorry, 2018.
Yeah, we're going to do our best to explain some of this. The questions have been asked at the regional level. They only do their regional economic forecast every 5 years or
Right.
something. We've asked these questions and not gotten great responses. I mean, the nature of employment
Right.
now and in the future is pretty tough. We're going to plan to do our best and answer as many of these questions as we can. And then employment capacity is always going to be a lot more squishy than the housing side. We regulate housing very strictly. Employment can change from one day to the next by adding a shift without building anything. So
Right.
by nature, it's a lot more squishy.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Volpe.
I'm reminded of what we started to look at for legislation a couple years ago with revamping the home business ordinance, so that may also
Yeah, we did.
be something to look at very soon.
And then the last piece on the top right there is within services is a very large category that comprises a lot of things, but I think that's, in the general, take that message is that services is where it's at. And then the words are bigger if that's a bigger part of what services is. So healthcare and social assistance is the biggest piece of services, then professional, scientific, and technical services, and those are the proportions in Everett. So I would imagine a lot of that is associated with Boeing and manufacturing, I think, and then accommodation and food services. So it's a very varied sector, but the one that is expected to dominate employment growth into the future throughout the country, really.
Councilmember Fossey and I were scratching our heads a little bit about that with the services category. I guess and I'll have to think about that offline, but it sounds like part of the situation there is that services, that income level for those services will vary just hugely.
Right.
From basic medical assistance or something like that, beginning of career stuff, to experienced professional class employees who are, late in career and all that. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Next slide. Okay, Becky's gonna talk a little bit about the process. Oh, you're good. Yeah.
Okay, here we are at the process. You've probably seen this graphic before, but the needle's moved. We are now in phase 2 of our project, where we last year spent time going out, taking comments from the public about what they would like to see in terms of growth and how to do that. We've taken that information, we've taken all the information that York just presented to us, and we have created some draft growth alternatives, how we might grow in 3 different ways. We're in the phase where we're going back out to the community and saying, okay, we've drafted these, now did we get them right? So just a last check-in before we move into our phase 3, where we really do the technical analysis and environmental impacts work. We want to share with you again that we have, I think every department is involved in this process because it affects many of the departments. Economic development, of course, the land use group, we have parks, transportation and infrastructure, obviously on housing, but all of these things need to work together in terms of a growth plan to make sure that we're planning for the quality of life moving forward as we grow. And I'm going to turn it over to York to explain this.
Sure. Apologize, I made a crazy slide, so we'll see how this goes. So our growth management planning framework includes a plan, the comprehensive plan, and then the implementing regulations and actions, how it actually works on the ground. The growth pattern, which we'll talk a lot about in these next slides, and the reason for this slide is something that you can see on a map. It's what goes where. The policies address a little bit more about how growth should occur and what the city's role in that growth should be. The existing policies that we have in the comprehensive plan inform the growth pattern, and the growth pattern will inform the policies in the updated plan. And then the plan is implemented primarily through development regulations and capital facility investments. And the policies guide those, of course. And so does the growth pattern. And then these next slides, the reason for this weird thing is that what we're focusing on right now in this stage of the process is the growth pattern. And this is what Becky's going to walk through in these next couple of slides. We're going to come back with more work on the policies, probably element by element, but know that that's a whole body of work that we're de-emphasizing today, but will definitely be a big part of the process.
So we're going to talk about the approach that we took when we were building our growth scenarios. We created, all areas of the city, we put into these growth geography groupings. Metro Everett, or our downtown or commercial business district, which we did just do a sub-area plan for, that was one geography, and is very different from other areas of the city. Then we kind of created what we call a frame, looking at the boundaries of Metro Everett and seeing if there were places on the edge that we might be able to add some growth to in a transitional way. And that it had easy access still to the downtown. We wanted to acknowledge in here the light rail stations. We have 3 plus the provisional station, which would give us 4 to take a look at and to think about how we plan for those going forward. And then, of course, our urban corridors, those would be Broadway, Rucker, Evergreen Way, south of Metro, so not any of those inside Metro, Everett Mall Way, and then 19th Street Southeast. Then off of those, again, the urban corridor frames, those are areas just right next to the frontage properties, and take a look at how we might address some growth in those areas. And there's an interesting set of east-west connectors that happen from north to south or south to north that are wider streets and maybe opportunities to add some more of the growth. So we've, you can see the streets there, so we're taking a look at those in terms of geography. And then there's everything else, which is all the residential neighborhoods. So here's what it looks like on a map. You can see the Metro Everett. The stations are, we have a half-mile radius circled around them. As you know, there hasn't been a preferred siting of those, so we just used the representative station and drew our radius. You see all of the urban corridors and the frames around those, as well as the light blue is those east-west connectors. Did I miss anything? And special areas. Special areas, waterfront, riverfront, the Baker Heights area or Park District, those are things that have sort of their own master planning on them, and we're not necessarily taking a look at those for growth. The other pieces that you'll see on here, see the little cutout on North Broadway on the west side, that's the Donovan District. So we have put boundaries or areas around our historic districts or areas too, as we want to treat them maybe differently. The next thing we did was to take a look at how we might categorize our housing. And some of this came from guidance and commerce where we've got to make sure that we can prove to them that we've planned for the right type of housing for those income bands. So these are the housing typologies, we call them, our single-family detached housing areas with accessory dwelling units. Then that orange neighborhood residential is more of that middle housing types. We'll hear a lot more about that in the coming months. So townhouse, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, that type of next level of housing. Then we took, the next level that we're looking at is low rise, which might be those smaller apartments that are around 3 stories or about that high. You'll see how that fits on the map when we bring those up. Mid-rise, which would go to maybe up to 6 or 7 floors, so we're still kind of working with the definitions of these to make sure we've got them calibrated right. And then the high-rise would be the tall apartments, condominiums of either 7 or 8 or more floors.
Becky, do we currently allow 6 floors with wood frame construction?
I believe there is, 6 floors can be allowed with wood frame construction. So what we're trying to do in the high-rise, it would be everything that hits that steel or other type of construction.
Thank you.
And it would be wood, 4 of wood on top of 1 of concrete, or 2 of concrete, so we say
Like
wood frame,
5 over
but it
1
could,
or-
yeah, 5 over 1 or 5 over 2.
Okay,
is
because
a
that's what I
concept.
thought we were doing. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. But I thought it was 4 over 1. I thought it was only 5 floors at this point. So we allow 6.
Well, we'll double check that. 5, I have 5 over 1 in my mind, and
Okay.
5 over 2 is the kind of maximum under
I
the
know,
building
but I may be
code, not the
remembering
zoning code. Yeah.
10 years ago or something.
Yet they're always changing it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, I will. Yeah, it's more of a best practices type zoning code thing, right? Not what we allow, because we can allow as high as we want, but depending on how it's built is all, just a little different.
Yeah, the building code for fire safety limits to 4 floors of wood, and then you can put that on 1 or 2 of concrete. So that typically is a very common style that you'll see around the region, is that 5 over 1 or 5 over 2. And then usually above that, you have to get into steel, or hopefully soon, composite laminate
Yeah.
timber.
So here's a graphic that Commerce has prepared, and we're showing where all of those housing types fit and what they might look like in their building form. I'm going to come back to this slide because it will probably make more sense after you see the maps. But this is what, using those typologies and using the geographies in a table, what the different alternatives look like. So you can see alternative 1 has still a lot of single family. Alternative 2 is more of the darker color, concentrated, so higher buildings in smaller areas. And then the dispersed growth pattern, which is 3, which disperses a little bit lower type housing in a bigger area. And as you can see there, the light rail stations, we have drawn the circles around them. The planning, the actual planning for those would be done during a sub-area planning process that would follow the comp plan update. There's just not enough time to focus in on each of those station areas, and we still have, during this process, and we still have time to get that work done. Any other thought about that?
No, we are, I mean, there's a couple, we'll be thinking about the station areas throughout the process, but for a defined and actual with a cover on it station area plan, we're thinking right after the comp plan.
So here is what the city's current growth plan is. So you see the arterials, they're dark brown, so they fit into that high rise. I think 9 stories along a lot of the Evergreen Way, 6 to 7 stories along Broadway. I want to point out in this, on the arterial North Broadway, only the half block is zoned for some of the higher density developments. So that you'll see the difference then when we move to the next alternatives. We're not planning to expand any employment areas, and I think York explained why that is, but we would use other implementation strategies to help increase our job capacity. We do need to make some minor increases to housing capacity in our current plan because we aren't able to meet our 2035 targets, so we have to account for that as well. So as we said in the earlier slides, there's room for about 21,000 new housing units. So this is alternative 2. It's the concentrated version, or the concentrated alternative, where it sort of follows the same pattern that the current plans do. It just expands it a little more. So along Broadway and along Evergreen Way, along Broadway specifically, North Broadway, we would expand that from half a block to a full block. So you might be able to, if somebody had a full block, you might be able to put something more substantial together along Broadway. And then, of course, you see the frames around those, and those are about, did we say 500? Couple blocks. So they would serve as transition areas into the single-family neighborhoods. And largely in this alternative, it doesn't change a lot of the single-family neighborhoods. We know that that can't be a part of a preferred alternative because of House Bill 1110. Nonetheless, we have created this alternative. We've been working on it for a long time, and we're kind of at a place where it would be too hard to change, but it is still useful to study this type of pattern, growth pattern, to understand the impacts of that when we go to build the preferred alternative.
Would that then mean that single-family would be redefined somewhat? What we might call single-family might end up being allowable fourplexes, et cetera?
Yeah,
from 1110?
probably, I think what we've come up with is neighborhood residential rather than single-family. And I think we have a slide on 1110 that maybe explains it a little bit in more detail. But that gives us our 38,000 housing units, which is the target that we're trying to achieve. And this would be the dispersed growth alternative. So you still have the growth along the urban corridors, but the frames become maybe a little smaller development because we're showing on this alternative middle housing in all single-family neighborhoods, current single-family neighborhoods. In this alternative, we're showing some mid-rise along the east-west connectors. So we're picking up some capacity along those corridors as well. The what? Low rise. Is that low rise? Yeah, so it's low rise. So there's high rise, and then there's low rise, and then there's the middle housing or neighborhood residential. We still have significant growth along the urban corridors and in the downtown Metro Everett because that's where a lot of our existing capacity is. So also I wanted to mention that in the high-rise areas and the mid-rise areas, those are mixed use. So it also accommodates some of our commercial and employment, not just the housing. That also meets our growth target. So as I mentioned, we're out talking to the community about this, asking them, are these the right ones that we should be studying, and or should we change something before we launch into that work?
And how are you getting that, what is the forum that you're able to ask these questions? I mean, is that at the Planning Commission? Are you going to the neighborhood meetings?
We have had 2 open houses already.
Okay.
We have the very last slide in the presentation.
Oh,
has
it
the
does.
full list of
Yeah, it
Oh,
does.
perfect, okay.
Yeah,
I
so we'll
didn't
get to that.
that one. We'll get-
So as you know, we were already working on middle housing. We had a grant from Commerce to do that, and it was something that we had mentioned in our housing action plan. So we intended when we first started developing our alternatives that one of the alternatives would be heavy on middle housing. And so all of that is coming together for us, and we just wanted to share how that was working. And middle housing bill, I'm gonna ask York to maybe walk through this one.
Sure. Yes, so this was the 1110 that was mentioned in the other agenda item, and this essentially makes, so this came in as the third leg of the stool We were not expecting it earlier in the process, although we were heading down the path of having an alternative to study the middle housing. This bill essentially says you're going to have to do some form of that middle housing in the city of Everett, as we are above that 75,000 threshold. The requirements of this bill are that we allow at least 4 units per residential lot throughout the city, and that's 6 units within a quarter-mile walk of a Swift BRT or a rail station. There is an alternate path that allows that certain areas may be reserved for detached housing and accessory dwelling units. That can be up to 25% of the lots in the city, and there are some limitations on what must be included in that 25% if you go that route, and what may not be included in that 25% if you go that route. Probably the big one is within that half-mile walking distance of Swift and rail stops. No matter what, under this state law, we're going to have to allow 4 units per lot. Development standards, so that's how many units you have to allow. The development standards, height, setbacks, lot coverage, design standards may not be more restrictive than what is in place for a detached house. So you can't say a detached house can be this big, but a middle house can only be this big. And then there are some preemption on parking requirements. No off-street parking requirement more restrictive than 0 within a half-mile of BRT and rail, 1 for lots that are smaller than 6,000 square feet, or 2 for lots larger than 6,000 square feet, and those are per unit. Right now, we require about 2, I believe, 2 per unit. 3 if you're on an access drive, which middle housing is less likely to be. So this, yes.
Well, a question about the standards about more restrictive than detached housing. I guess I want to make sure I understand it clearly. If you were talking about an area where you were then going to be allowing 4 units on a lot, would the total of those 4 units be 4 times what you would allow for 1 unit on that lot, or would it be 1/4 of what you would allow for 1 unit on that lot?
I think that so right now we have some requirements in our code that if you're building a attached housing in a single-family zone, you must, what's an example? You must have a front porch and an entrance facing the street within 30 feet of the street frontage. We do not require that for a house. We require vertical and horizontal articulation and architectural styles of attached housing. We do not require that for detached housing.
So I think I see design standards that way, but I'm thinking more in terms of square footage limitations, lot coverage limitations, impervious surface limitations, those kinds of things. Would the collective effect of putting 4 dwelling units on a property be 4 times the lot coverage, for 1/4 of the tree coverage, 4 times the impervious surface coverage?
Yeah, I had not thought of it that way. I don't think so. I think that if you're allowed to cover 40% of your lot with buildings, you can cover it with 1 building in a detached house or a 4-plex, but you wouldn't be able to do 4 times that up to 100%.
Okay, good. That's the kind of stuff I think in terms of outreach, if we're gonna inform our community members about this, those kind of practical examples, and the examples you showed earlier, some examples of different housing affordability types. I definitely would favor those in terms of having that kind of stuff. Plus some of the stuff you've done with ADUs, there are some good pictures of that as well. I think we're going to need that if we're going to be able to explain this.
Yeah. And this whole middle housing work program that we've been working on with the grant is helpful with those materials. We're going to the Planning Commission, since we're on the middle housing topic. We were going 2 weeks ago, but the Park District conversation was robust enough that it took the whole agenda. We're going back to focus on middle housing specifically at the June 6th meeting, and then again 2 weeks after that on June 20th.
Councilmember Vogel?
A couple things. I just wanted to remind everybody that when we're talking about middle housing and changing it all up, and how more units have to be allowed. That it means just that, it's allowable, it's not taking away anything. So single-family homes, or whatever we choose to call them, will continue to also be allowed. So it's just that you can have more. And speaking of parking, I was just remembering at the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting that I went to, they had brought up a couple of things in Japan. I believe, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, you're only allowed to own a car if you have a place to put it on your very own property, because a car is private property. And if we can start thinking about cars being private property and then putting them on public land, what a lot of free space us public landowners are giving away. And so I think that also puts a different spin on it when we remember that cars are our own private property. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Councilmember Ryan?
Thanks. So going back a few slides, I'm trying to digest through things. I was curious if there had been discussions about an alternative 2.5 where there's both middle housing and single housing. So it seems like there's one or the other, but it's my understanding too that House Bill 1110 now takes alternative 2 maybe off the table because single family isn't a thing anymore. Am I on the right track?
Yes, one thing we didn't mention about the process is we've got 3 alternatives, and maybe we're about to mention it, but we have these 3 alternatives that we're going to study in an environmental impact statement. We're going to run through the entire list of topics, historic preservation as a topic. How does alternative 1, 2, and 3 perform relative to that? Stormwater, traffic, parks, housing affordability, economy, and all of that. Then we will come back to the council and the public with the results of that environmental impact statement. There's a parallel, if you remember the light rail, we picked certain stations to study, and then we'll come back and then we'll use that information to make a decision. With this, we'll come back with that information, and then we'll look to create a preferred alternative that seems likely to have aspects of both. And then we will study that again briefly, and then make a decision on the final product. So we're not expecting to ask you to pick one alternative at the end of this. We wanted to have the alternatives be separate enough that there is clear differentiation to tell that story. How does middle housing relate to stormwater and water quality compared to a very concentrated and very tall, focused on arterials development pattern? Yes, the middle housing bill made alternative 2 sort of not a viable alternative, but we still think that the story around the concentrated aspect of it is going to be interesting and is going to tell us some things, and there are probably going to be some places that we do want to adopt some of the higher heights that are going to be in the concentrated alternative. And then similarly, we anticipate that there might be a call to use that second path in the middle housing bill that would allow some of the areas of the city to remain reserved for detached housing, and so then that capacity would need to be made up in higher concentration somewhere else. So we will definitely create an alternative, or will be able to, that mixes and matches.
Great, thank you. Separate question. I saw that the different departments that have been involved, and it does list transportation, but I was curious if that also includes Everett Transit as folks that have provided input. So looking at the map, I can think through a few bus routes that have always been a bus route in Everett. And for transit-oriented development, I guess I would like to see full stripes on that page that might mimic the bus routes that have always been bus routes, Colby, Broadway, north-souths, and
Evergreen?
Well, it's already striped pretty well there. So yeah, I guess that's my suggestion, is I would just see which routes have always been routes, and then use that for the transit-oriented development blueprint. Thanks.
One other clarification. If I understand right, 1110 did have an exception for developments that had covenants and restrictions to only single-family detached. So those would, I guess, have to be part of that 25% or so with one of those alternatives you're talking about. There would not be the state mandate on those properties.
Right, what we allow or don't allow would not change what a homeowners association does and does not allow. So there are private contracts and covenants that limit development and subdivision and middle housing and accessory dwelling units and lots more things. If we were to allow 25-story buildings there, they still couldn't build it, so whether we did or not. But that also means that a certain proportion of the city is kind of off the table for growth in that way, and then to the extent we know about it, we should need to make up for it in other places.
There were, maybe I can jump in, like, there's two types of references to covenants. So there's like, I have an HOA and I can't, my house has to be a certain color and I can't have an ADU in the backyard. And just like York said, we could allow those things, but your HOA, CC&Rs wouldn't allow you to build it. The other reference to covenants has to do with historically racist covenants, largely on titles. And there was a fantastic research project through UW that just kind of, well, they're not quite done, but a lot of the work has wrapped up, that helped build some of our analysis on, as part of the middle housing grant. And that looked at basically anything that was built before 1950 in Everett or platted and built probably had a covenant on it that said that only white people can live on this property unless they're a domestic servant. They listed other people of other ethnic minorities in different ways, depending on kind of when they were built and what was happening at the time. But all of those parcels that we know about have to allow middle housing on them. They can't be part of that 25% that sort of remains exclusive.
Just thinking on plat from 1938, it didn't have those restrictions on it, but some did not, some did, yeah.
Yeah. So we just we're just submitting the final kind of analysis to Commerce, and so you can see the thing I was doing before I started coming here on Wednesday nights.
Questions?
Oh, are we now at the question
I
part?
think we're.
I was
Okay.
going to just cover the specific amendment
Thank
request.
you.
You might have seen that we've done a call out for applications for anyone in the community or anybody of interest in Everett to submit a request for amendments either to the comprehensive plan, the zoning map, the development regulations. So we're accepting those applications now through June 12th. We did an extension on that. But the idea being they would call us. We have had a number of calls, and you will have an opportunity then. We'll treat it similar to how we do the docket, where we'll take a look at the list. We will make a recommendation on which one we think should move forward in this process. We'll share that with the Planning Commission. They'll make a recommendation to you, and then you'll get a chance to look at the list and see what you would like to include. That's the timeline there. The summer is when we will be reviewing those applications, and then sometime around winter of 2024, it'll be approved or not approved along with the comprehensive plan periodic update package.
So this is separate from our annual docket cycle.
We combine the docket cycle into this process because
I
we're so
see.
close to
The date.
this, yeah.
Got it. Okay, I got it. Councilmember Fosse.
Could you give, thank you, could you give an example of like an application that you might have received or not?
Yeah, we have talked with a number of folks, but for example, we have somebody that has a UR3 piece of property, and he would like to rezone it to UR4. So he can submit that material to us, and we can take a look at it in terms of you know, does it fit with the growth strategy? Does it make sense? What's another example? Somebody doesn't like a development regulation. I mean, people can do this during our regular docket process too, but they could come in and propose a different development regulation or new language. Also, that applies to the policies in the comp plan as well. Any of the text that folks would like to see differently, or their comp plan designation.
I think this is a little bit of an interesting process because we started by saying public participation is a continuous aspect of this development. We take public comment at every meeting. We're going to have several specific public hearings. So what is the difference between a public comment that somebody comes up here and says, I think you should delete policy 1.1 versus the specific amendment request in which they say the same thing? The difference between the two is that this is a very structured, it's required by state law that we have this path, is the reason that we have to do that. But it's also very structured. The requirements for the analysis that support the application that come in are fairly robust, and it's not going to be easy to do. So rather than coming here to say, which you could always say, I want to delete policy 1.1 and here's my packet of information why, but in this case we're requiring that packet of information and supporting documentation, and then it guarantees a meeting, a exposure at a meeting with the Planning Commission and the City Council, at which we have to kind of you'll have to take a vote on it specifically. Public comment still is the #1 path to hearing from the public, and I know you take that seriously, we take it seriously, and we will be listening throughout this entire process. So for folks who do not take part in this specific amendment request, please still do interact with staff and your elected officials to make your voice heard, and that is still a very productive path to change in the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you. If council members have amendment requests, what's the proper protocol to submit those?
So we thought about this just today, and we can think of, you're special, you have multiple opportunities at this one. This specific amendment request process could be one. I think the earlier that we know about it, especially if it's a significant one that needs to have environmental review as part of it, the earlier the better, so that we can fit that in. So the specific amendment request process would be one path. We won't make you do all of the paperwork, or more accurately, we would do the paperwork for you for it, and the analysis. There were 5. The second one was
During the specific amendment requests, look at the specific amendment requests.
Oh, yeah, well, we're gonna come back to you in a couple of July or August for kind of consensus that these alternatives are right. There's a couple little details, and we're still doing our outreach and working with the Planning Commission. So at that point, you could say, and one example, we got 2 requests as part of this specific amendment request process on an east-west corridor that met our general criteria for it, but that we had kind of missed. And so we added that into the list. You could also make those changes at that point. And then we'll be coming to you for the different elements. So we're probably going to come to you for a meeting or 2 on the transportation element and on the climate change and sustainability element and the housing element. Those would be great points to say, I want this policy changed or this thing. And then you have all the way up to an amendment, just like this will ultimately come before you as a big old ordinance in winter 2024. And you have the ability to make amendments at that point. Now, and if it needs environmental review, if it's a substantial change that triggers that, then we would have to delay the process at that point. So that's why the earlier the better, but multiple opportunities.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great.
Just the last,
My question.
So we've done a couple of open houses. We announced at the Council of Neighborhoods. We're here tonight with you. We've been to the Built Environment Committee. We talked with the, Health and Human Services Committee a little bit about the process. We're going to visit our Citizen Advisory Committee and share with them. They have a lot of interest in affordable housing especially. And we are going to have an open house online. So for those that like to do that still, we'll have a table at Sorticulture, and then we're really trying to plug the last open house at EVCC, Everett Community College, on the 13th of June. So we hope folks can make it, and then we'll be back at Planning Commission. Well, I think from now until they pass the whole thing on to you, we'll be talking with them about the comp plan.
And at the Planning Commission, they allow public comment at every meeting, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Schwab, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending that important meeting on our behalf tonight.
This is where I kind of want to weigh in a little bit. The perception from our neighborhoods, earned or not, is that there has been a communication gap on several different projects, including a bike path. Several of our services for homeless, progress. People feel like they have been surprised, uneducated, didn't know about it. I'd really hate to see this fit into that pattern. Now, I'm not trying to point fingers at you guys or anything. I don't know. But, remember, a lot of these things, people don't react to them until it starts affecting them directly. So I really encourage you and the administration to do whatever they can to get people involved. I don't know if door to door, maybe I'll need to go door to door and say, if you could make some cards for me, I'd probably go door to door. Something needs to be done a little bit more than we've done in the past. So I think that for the most part, I think the city does a pretty good job, and people have their jobs, they have their life, and, things they don't really pay attention to until it happens. So I just really encourage you guys to do a good outreach on this one. Thank you.
I'll vote
Appreciate
for
those comments.
the idea of a postcard size thing, maybe with a pointer to a website, because those things kind of hang around, can circulate, can be stuck in at businesses and holders and that sort of stuff, can be handed out at neighborhood meetings, and that'd help me do a more efficient job of it. I like that possibility.
We appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, and we're gonna send you and post to the website. We have a public participation plan that lays out those types of meetings and all the other methods that we're gonna use, and we would love to hear your feedback. It's gonna be a living document, so it's not gonna be finalized, but it lays out the methods that we're gonna use. Alberto's our engagement specialist for this project. We definitely hear you. I was at those council meetings and heard those concerns and heard your responses to them, and my biggest fear, I think, is coming to the end of this process and having a lot of people, it's guaranteed that not everybody of the 115,000 people in the city will know about this, but we want to be able to, with a straight face, said that we did everything possible to spread the word. We'll get a better product that way as well.
Yeah, I think it's, go ahead, Councilmember Rain.
So the comp plan's a state requirement. Are there state dollars to help with outreach or state resources that we can utilize?
Yeah, that's how we were able to hire Alberto for this project, with exactly those state dollars. And there's also other funds that we're going to put towards room rentals and other aspects of the engagement. It's hard to know what point in the process. The more specific and the more, so like the end of the process is going to be when most people are going to be most interested. We've been trying to get the word out. I was jealous to see that the Park District open house got twice as many people as our comprehensive plan open house, even though ours is clearly a very impactful project for the city. But that one is specific. There are renderings, and ours is general and relatively early in the process. So it's a challenge to get on busy people's radar screens, but you can see all the different ways that we're trying, and we're learning from each one of those and what works: weekends, weeknights, midday, online, in person, outside, inside. We're trying them all, and we'll adapt as we go along.
We're getting ready to launch our Talk with a Planner, which means that we have hours that folks can call in. I mean, anybody can call in anytime, but we're advertising. You can call in if you just want to talk with a planner, and we can share information about that. So we're getting ready to blast that out tomorrow.
Pitch a planner.
I would say that go ahead, Councilmember
Yeah, so
Schwab.
one more on the outreach. I've heard a lot about this, so I guess I'm just gonna repeat and represent my people in my community. The neighborhood groups. You planning on doing presentations to the neighborhood groups?
We have offered, at the Council of Neighborhoods, we had offered to any of the chairs that we would give a presentation if they would like us to come to their meetings.
Did any of them say yes?
We have been to a few neighborhoods. I don't think, we didn't get anybody asked at that meeting, but maybe we could ask Nicole to just make that announcement
Be
again.
more convincing or very
Yeah.
convincing, yeah.
Well, now the pictures are a little more real now. So we
Yeah.
did do some presentations to Bayside and Delta and Port Gardner. Yeah,
And
you had to
Northwest.
do that one, yeah, and Northwest. But it was more theoretical, so I think maybe now that there's some maps and, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say, is I think your materials look really good, and there's a lot of visual that you could take out to those neighborhoods, and like everyone else, I agree. A lot of people in our community will complain about this at the end, and we will have tried to reach out to people, and so we recognize that it's, all our best efforts still don't reach people. But I think if we could get Nicole to really press the neighborhood associations to accept this, and we need to impress on them that we're talking about significant changes in density. People living next door to you in duplexes and fourplexes and sixplexes. I think people need to understand what we're trying to accomplish, because you've got some great options for how we would manage the growth, and I think that it'd be good, if we can get more representation from the community in on that. That would be better. In the old days, we used to send information out in the utility bills. Do we still mail those? Is that even a thing anymore?
We were thinking about that, and I believe we don't.
Okay.
But we can do a mailer, it's like 60 cents a piece.
Do you? Okay, I think I'm paperless, so, but to the extent that, if that's an option, that might be a way to think about doing it. And so, good luck on that. I think it's hard to manage. Yes,
So
Councilmember Ryan.
I'll continue beating this dead horse. As the former Council of Neighborhoods liaison, the Council of Neighborhoods leaders had shared frustrations about getting the word out to have more people show up for neighborhood meetings. And I think neighborhood meetings are great, but that is 0.001% of the full neighborhood that's there at those meetings. So I love the idea of a mailer. I think we've been hearing from community members quite a bit that they haven't been hearing about things, so a mailer that can point people to the neighborhood website, to the comp plan website, to our newsletter sign up, all of it, I think would be a good way to check that box to show that we did our best to reach out.
With state dollars.
Yes.
Yes. Any last questions? Thank you, Yorick and Becky, for being here, and we will look forward to having you back when you have more to share with us. Will you come back after you get through that public input process then? Yeah, perfect. We've come to the end of our agenda, but we are now going to go into executive session, which is expected to last 5 minutes with possible action to follow. Do we have everyone?
No, Dawn.
Dawn? The city council is back from its executive session, and I will call on our city attorney, Mr. Hall.
Thank you. This matter involves a tort claim submitted by Craig Apperton in connection with a water main break in the Eastmont neighborhood that damaged his duplex. There was pretty extensive damage. Our adjuster has looked at the damage and has reviewed all of the invoices submitted and believes that a settlement of $46,063.86 is justified. The claimant has indicated he will accept this amount if approved by the city, so we are hoping for a motion to authorize the mayor to execute a settlement agreement in that amount.
Thank you. Do I hear such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab?
Yes.
Councilmember Fosse?
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes.
Vice President Tui?
Yes.
President Stonecipher?
Yes. And with no further business, we are adjourned.